I watched the HOA president's Lexus pull up to my Lakeside Campground entrance at 7 in the morning, and I knew my peaceful life in northern Minnesota was about to get complicated. My name is Yates Irving, and I had owned 20 acres of pristine woodland along Lake Superior for the past 8 years. The property came with a quarter-mile of rocky shoreline, towering white pines, and a small campground I had built with my own 2 hands. 6 sites, each with a fire ring, picnic table, and enough privacy that you could pretend civilization didn't exist. I charged $20 a night, barely broke even most summers, and that was exactly how I liked it. This wasn't about money. It was about sharing something beautiful with people who appreciated it. The woman who stepped out of that Lexus was named Brenda Patterson, and she had made it her personal mission to make my life hell ever since the Pine Ridge HOA expanded their territory 2 years ago. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that had no business being anywhere near actual nature, and her highlighted hair was sprayed into submission despite the morning breeze coming off the lake. "Mr. Irving," she called out, her voice sharp enough to scare off the loons. "We need to talk about your little camping operation." I set down the split-rail fence post I had been working on and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Morning, Brenda. What brings you out here so early?" She pulled a manila folder from her car and marched toward me with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in their entire life. "The HOA board held an emergency meeting last night. We have received numerous complaints about your campground." "Complaints from who?" I kept my voice level. "My campers love it here. I have a 5-star rating online." "The complaints are from residents of Pine Ridge," she snapped. "Your campers are using our roads, creating traffic and lowering property values. You know what it does to our community when we have strangers driving through at all hours." I almost laughed. Pine Ridge was a gated community of overpriced lake houses that had sprouted up like mushrooms after a rain about 4 years ago. The main road through their development connected to County Road 7, which was a public road that ran right past my property. My campers didn't go through Pine Ridge at all unless they were lost. "Brenda, my entrance is on County Road 7. Nobody needs to go through your neighborhood to get here." She thrust the folder at me. "Nevertheless, the board has voted unanimously. Your campground is in violation of our community standards and zoning regulations. You need to cease operations immediately." I took the folder and flipped it open. Inside was a stack of official-looking documents covered in legal jargon. The gist of it was that Pine Ridge HOA claimed my property was somehow subject to their rules because of some boundary reassessment done by the county the previous year. "This is ridiculous," I said, looking up at her. "My property isn't part of Pine Ridge. I'm not in your HOA. I never signed anything. The county rezoning last spring included your parcel in the Pine Ridge Community District," Brenda said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Whether you signed anything or not is irrelevant. You are now subject to our regulations, and those regulations prohibit commercial camping operations." My jaw tightened. "I'll need to verify this with my lawyer." "You do that," she said, already turning back toward her car. "But until this is resolved, you are not to accept any new campers. If you do, we will take legal action. Have a blessed day, Mr. Irving." She drove off, leaving a small cloud of dust on my gravel drive. I stood there holding the folder, feeling my blood pressure rise with each passing second. This couldn't be legal. There was no way an HOA could just claim my property without my knowledge or consent. I spent the rest of that day on the phone. First with the county assessor's office, then with a real estate attorney named Jim Kowalski, who had handled my property purchase years ago. What I learned made my stomach sink. The county had indeed done a rezoning the previous spring. Pine Ridge had lobbied hard for it, claiming they needed to expand their community district for future development. My property had been included in that expansion, along with several others. The kicker was that notice had been sent to all affected property owners, but I had been out of state visiting my sister in Oregon during the public comment period. The notice had arrived. I had apparently ignored it, and the rezoning went through without objection. "Can they really force me into their HOA?" I asked Jim. There was a long pause on the other end. "It's complicated, Yates. The rezoning gives them some authority, but whether they can retroactively apply their rules to your existing business is questionable. You had that campground operating before they expanded their district. There's an argument for grandfathering. So what do I do? File a formal objection with the HOA board, request a hearing. In the meantime, I would recommend continuing operations as normal. Don't let them bully you into shutting down without a fight." I thanked him and hung up. The problem was that fighting an HOA meant legal fees, time, and stress. Brenda and her cronies had deep pockets and nothing but time on their hands. I was one guy trying to make an honest living and share a beautiful place with people. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated fast. I filed my objection and requested a hearing, which the board scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, I kept the campground open. I had regular customers, families who came back every summer, and I wasn't going to turn them away because of some bureaucratic power grab. Then the citations started arriving. Code violations for improper signage, violations for inadequate parking, violations for my fire rings not meeting some obscure safety standard that Brenda had apparently made up on the spot. Each citation came with a $50 fine. By the end of the second week, I had racked up over $800 in fines. I ignored them. Jim told me to document everything, but not to pay. Paying would be an admission that the HOA had authority over my property. The hearing finally arrived on a muggy Tuesday evening in late June. The Pine Ridge Community Center was a modern building with too much glass and not enough character. The board sat at a long table at the front of a conference room, with Brenda right in the center like a queen on her throne. About 15 residents filled the chairs behind me, all of them probably there to complain about my campground ruining their lake views or some such nonsense. Brenda called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a presentation about community standards and property values. She had charts showing the decline in home prices near my property. Never mind that the entire real estate market had been soft that year. She blamed it all on my campground bringing in the wrong element. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood up and laid out my case. I had owned the property years before Pine Ridge existed. I had all the proper permits from the county. My campground was a legitimate business that harmed nobody. The rezoning had happened without my knowledge, and I should be grandfathered in. "Mr. Irving," Brenda interrupted before I was halfway through. "Your ignorance of the rezoning process is not our problem. You had the opportunity to object and you did not. The rules are clear. No commercial camping operations within the Pine Ridge Community District." "Then change the rules," I said, my frustration bubbling over. "Or better yet, acknowledge that my property shouldn't be in your district in the first place." "That is not going to happen," she said flatly. "The board has already voted. Your campground is in violation. You have 30 days to cease all operations and remove all camping infrastructure. If you do not comply, we will pursue legal action to force compliance, and we will place a lien on your property for all outstanding fines." The room erupted in applause from the residents behind me. I turned to look at them, these people who had probably never spent a night under the stars in their lives, and felt a cold fury settle in my chest. "This isn't over," I said quietly. Brenda smiled that same cold smile. "Yes, Mr. Irving, it is." I walked out of that community center knowing I had two choices. I could spend the next year fighting them in court, draining my savings and probably losing anyway, or I could find another way. That night, I sat on the shore of Lake Superior with a beer and watched the sun set over the water. The waves lapped against the rocks with a rhythm older than any HOA board. This land had been here long before Brenda Patterson decided she owned it, and it would be here long after she was gone. An idea started forming in my head. It was crazy, probably illegal in a dozen different ways, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Pine Ridge HOA claimed my campground violated their rules. Fine. But they only had authority within their community district. If I could find a way to access my campground that bypassed their territory entirely, they would have no grounds to shut me down. I pulled up a map on my phone and started studying the area. My property bordered County Road 7 on the east side, which ran straight through Pine Ridge territory. But on the west side, my land backed up to a large tract of state forest. And that state forest had logging roads running through it, old trails that had been used for decades to access the backcountry. If I could connect my property to one of those logging roads, I could create an entirely new access route. My campers wouldn't need to go through Pine Ridge at all. They could come in from the west, through state land, and the HOA would have nothing to say about it. The problem was that there was about a quarter-mile of dense forest between my property line and the nearest logging road. The terrain was rough, full of rocks and thick undergrowth. Creating a trail would require serious equipment. I knew a guy named Dale Severson who owned a small excavation company out of Duluth. We had gone to high school together, and he owed me a favor from when I had helped him move his equipment after a job went sideways a few years back. I called him the next morning. "Yates, you old dog," Dale answered on the second ring. "What's going on?" "I need to borrow a bulldozer," I said. There was a pause. "A bulldozer, just like that, just like that." "What are you planning to do with a bulldozer?" "Better if you don't know all the details," I said. "But I promise it's nothing illegal. I just need to clear a trail through some woods on my property." Dale laughed. "You always did know how to make life interesting. I've got a Cat D6 that's available next week. I can have it delivered Monday morning. Just promise me you know what you're doing." "I promise," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. The bulldozer arrived on a flatbed truck at dawn the following Monday. It was a beautiful machine, all yellow paint and raw power. The driver helped me unload it at the edge of my property, showed me the basics of the controls, and then left me alone with 23 tons of diesel-powered earth-moving equipment. I had done some research over the weekend. State forest land allowed for trail creation with proper permits, which I had applied for online. The permits wouldn't be approved for another month, but I figured I could argue I was doing preliminary survey work if anyone asked. The key was to connect my property to the existing logging road without causing major environmental damage. I had flagged a route that followed the natural contours of the land, avoided any wetlands, and minimized tree removal. I fired up the dozer and felt the engine rumble to life beneath me. The morning air was cool, and mist was rising off the lake. I took a deep breath and pushed the throttle forward. The machine lurched ahead, blades scraping across the ground. I adjusted the hydraulics and started pushing into the forest. Small saplings bent and snapped under the blade. Rocks scraped and tumbled. The noise was tremendous, a roar that echoed through the trees and sent birds scattering into the sky. I worked methodically, taking my time to follow the route I had planned. The dozer was surprisingly responsive once I got the hang of it. I could adjust the blade angle to push debris to the side, creating a clean corridor about 12 feet wide. Wider than a walking trail but narrow enough to minimize impact. After about 2 hours, I had cleared maybe 100 yards. The work was slow going. The forest was thicker than I had anticipated, and there were several large boulders that required careful maneuvering to push aside. But I was making progress, and that felt good. Around mid-morning, I heard a vehicle approaching from the direction of County Road 7. I shut down the dozer and climbed off to investigate. A white SUV with the Pine Ridge HOA logo on the door was parked at my campground entrance. Brenda Patterson was standing next to it, her phone held up like she was recording video. I walked over, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Something I can help you with, Brenda. What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, lowering her phone. "I can hear that machinery from a mile away. You're supposed to be shutting down your operation, not expanding it." "I'm not expanding anything," I said calmly. "I'm doing some land management work on my property, nothing to do with the campground." "Land management," she repeated skeptically. "With a bulldozer?" "That's right." Her eyes narrowed. "If you are attempting to circumvent the board's decision by creating some kind of back entrance, you should know that will not work. Your property is in our district regardless of how people access it." "Actually, Brenda, that's where you're wrong," I said, feeling a surge of satisfaction. "Your authority only extends to activities within the Pine Ridge Community District. If my campers access my property from outside your district, through state forest land, then they never enter your territory at all. You have no say over what happens on state forest roads." I could see the wheels turning in her head as she processed this. Her face went through several shades of red. "That's absurd," she finally sputtered. "You can't just build a road through state forest." "Actually, I can with proper permits, which I have applied for." "Applied for," she pounced on that. "So you don't have permits yet." "Preliminary survey work doesn't require permits," I said, which was probably not entirely true but sounded good. "I'm just exploring options." Brenda jabbed a finger at me. "The board will hear about this." "You are in clear violation of the cease and desist order. Expect legal action, Mr. Irving." She got back in her SUV and peeled out, spraying gravel. I watched her go, then returned to the dozer with a grin on my face. I had gotten under her skin, and that felt like a small victory. I worked through the afternoon, stopping only for water breaks and to let the machine cool down. By sunset, I had cleared nearly a quarter of the route. The trail was starting to take shape, a clear corridor through the dense forest. I could see how it would all connect, how campers could drive in from the logging road, wind through the trees, and emerge at the backside of my campground without ever touching Pine Ridge territory. Over the next 3 days, I kept at it. The work was exhausting, both physically and mentally. Operating a dozer requires constant attention. One wrong move and you could flip the machine or cause serious damage, but I was driven by a stubborn determination. Brenda and her board thought they could bully me into submission. They were about to learn otherwise. On the 4th day, I broke through to the logging road. The moment the dozer pushed aside the last stand of brush and I saw the gravel road stretching away into the state forest, I felt a rush of triumph. I had done it. I had created a back entrance to my property that completely bypassed Pine Ridge. I spent the rest of that day smoothing out the trail, grading it so water would drain properly, and reinforcing soft spots with gravel from a pile I had delivered earlier. By evening, I had a functional road. It wasn't pretty, but it was solid enough for most vehicles to navigate. That night, I put up new signs at the logging road entrance directing people to Irving's Lakeside Campground. I updated my website and social media with the new access information. Then I cracked open a beer and waited to see what would happen. The first campers using the new route arrived the next weekend. A family from Wisconsin in a pickup with a camper shell. They navigated the trail without any issues and set up at one of the lakeside sites. The father, a guy named Tom with a friendly face and a firm handshake, told me they had been coming to my campground for 3 years running. "I heard you were having trouble with the HOA," he said. "Glad to see you found a way around them. This place is too special to lose." "Thanks, Tom," I said. "I appreciate that." More campers came throughout the weekend. Word was spreading online that Irving's Lakeside Campground was still open for business, just with a different entrance. My regular customers were loyal, and they didn't care about driving an extra mile through the forest to get here. On Monday morning, Brenda showed up again. This time she brought company. A county sheriff's deputy in a tan uniform stood next to her at the new trail entrance where it connected to my property. I walked over, my heart rate picking up. "Morning, officer. Is there a problem?" The deputy, whose name tag read Jensen, looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Irving, I have received a complaint about unauthorized road construction on state forest land. Miss Patterson here claims you built this road without proper permits." "I applied for trail permits 3 weeks ago," I said. "I'm still waiting for approval, but I was under the impression that preliminary survey work was allowed." "This is more than preliminary survey work," Brenda interjected. "This is a full road. He has been bringing commercial traffic through protected forest land." Deputy Jensen held up a hand. "Madam, let me handle this." He turned back to me. "Do you have documentation of your permit application?" "I do," I said. "Give me 5 minutes and I will get it for you." I jogged back to my cabin and printed out the email confirmation from the State Forestry Department. When I returned, I handed it to Jensen. He reviewed it carefully, his expression neutral. "This shows you applied for a recreational trail permit," he said. "Not a commercial access road." My stomach sank. The campground is a small operation. I didn't think commercial permits were necessary. "That's for the forestry department to decide, not me," Jensen said. "But I'm going to have to ask you to stop using this route for commercial traffic until your permits are sorted out. If you continue, Miss Patterson can file for an injunction, and then we're looking at potential fines or other legal consequences." Brenda was practically glowing with satisfaction. "You heard the officer, Mr. Irving. Close down this little road of yours." I felt my jaw clench. "Officer, with all due respect, the forestry department hasn't told me to stop. I followed proper procedures. I applied for permits. If there's an issue with commercial versus recreational use, that's something I can address in the permit application. But I don't think you have authority to shut down my trail based on a complaint from someone who doesn't own this land." Jensen shifted his weight, clearly not wanting to be in the middle of this. "Look, Mr. Irving, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just here to respond to a complaint. My suggestion is that you contact the forestry department, get clarification on your permits, and resolve this properly. In the meantime, use your best judgment." "His best judgment?" Brenda's voice shot up an octave. "Officer, he is clearly in violation. You need to shut this down right now." "Madam, I have responded to your complaint and provided Mr. Irving with information. That's all I can do. If you want an injunction, you'll need to go through the courts." Jensen tipped his hat to both of us and walked back to his patrol car. Brenda whirled on me. "This isn't over, Mr. Irving. The board has already voted to pursue legal action. You are going to lose everything." "Maybe," I said quietly, "but I'm not going down without a fight." She stormed off, and I spent the rest of the morning on the phone with the state forestry department. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached a forester named Paula Hendricks, who actually seemed to understand my situation. "So you built a trail to access your private campground," she said, summarizing what I had told her. "And you applied for recreational trail permits, but you're using it for commercial access." "That's correct," I said. "I didn't realize there was a distinction. The campground is very small scale, 6 sites. It's not like I'm running a major resort." Paula hummed thoughtfully. "The distinction exists because commercial operations have different impact requirements. More traffic, more wear on the land, more potential for environmental damage. That said, 6 campsites is pretty minimal. Let me review your application and the route you cleared. Can you send me GPS coordinates and some photos?" "Absolutely," I said, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Give me a week," Paula said. "I'll come out and do a site inspection. If everything looks good, I can probably amend your permit to allow limited commercial access." "No guarantees, but I'll see what I can do." I thanked her profusely and spent the next hour documenting everything. Photos of the trail from multiple angles, GPS waypoints, measurements of the cleared width, notes on erosion control measures I had implemented. I sent it all to Paula in a detailed email. That week was tense. I kept the campground open, bringing people in through the new trail despite the uncertainty. I figured if I was going to go down, I might as well go down fighting. Brenda escalated things predictably. I received a formal legal notice from Pine Ridge HOA's attorneys demanding I cease all operations and pay over $3,000 in accumulated fines. The notice threatened litigation if I did not comply within 10 days. I forwarded it to Jim Kowalski, my attorney, who called me back within an hour. "Yates, this is getting serious," he said. "They're threatening a lawsuit and a lien on your property. Even if we win, the legal fees could bankrupt you." "I know," I said, "but what choice do I have? Roll over and let them steal my campground?" "No, but we need to be smart about this. Let me file a response challenging their authority. In the meantime, document everything. Every interaction with Brenda, every citation, every piece of evidence that shows they're overreaching." "Already doing that," I said. Paula from the forestry department showed up on Thursday morning in a green pickup truck with the state seal on the door. She was in her 50s, wearing cargo pants and a department jacket, and she had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who spent more time in the woods than in an office. I met her at the trailhead on the logging road and walked her through the entire route. She took notes, checked for erosion, examined the trees I had removed, and asked detailed questions about drainage and wildlife impact. "You did a pretty good job," she said when we emerged at my campground. "The route follows natural contours, you avoided sensitive areas, and the width is reasonable. This is better than half the logging operations I see." "So I can get the permit?" I asked, trying not to sound too eager. "I will recommend approval for a limited commercial access permit," Paula said. "With conditions. You'll need to install water bars for drainage, mark the route clearly, and commit to annual maintenance. Traffic will be limited to your campground customers only, no public access. And you'll need to pay an annual fee for commercial use of state forest land." "How much?" I asked warily. $300 a year. I almost laughed. After spending thousands fighting the HOA, $300 sounded like a bargain. "Deal, absolutely," Paula smiled. "Good, I will process the paperwork when I get back to the office. You should have your permit within 2 weeks. In the meantime, you can continue operating under provisional approval." She handed me a signed letter on state forestry letterhead stating exactly that. I could have kissed her. "Thank you," I said, shaking her hand firmly. You have no idea how much this means. Actually, I do, Paula said. I've dealt with Pine Ridge HOA before. They tried to restrict hiking access on state trails that ran near their development a few years back. Some people think they own the whole world. After Paula left, I made copies of her letter and sent one to Jim Kowalski, one to Deputy Jensen, and one directly to Brenda Patterson at the Pine Ridge HOA office. I included a note with Brenda's copy explaining that my trail was now operating under provisional approval from the State Forestry Department, and that my campground would continue normal operations. Her response arrived the next day via certified mail. The HOA was filing a lawsuit seeking an injunction to shut down my campground and a lien on my property for unpaid fines. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. Jim and I spent those 6 weeks preparing. We gathered evidence showing that my campground predated the HOA district expansion, that the rezoning notice had not been properly delivered, that the HOA's rules were being selectively enforced, and that I was now operating legally through state forest land access. We also filed a countersuit alleging harassment, improper authority, and abuse of the rezoning process. Jim found 2 other property owners who had been caught up in the same district expansion and were facing similar issues. We consolidated our cases. The courtroom was in the county courthouse in Two Harbors, a building that had been standing since the 1920s. The hearing was held on a humid morning in late August. Brenda sat with 2 other HOA board members and their attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit. I sat with Jim, feeling underdressed in khakis and a button-down shirt. The judge was a woman named Margaret Hanson who had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. She listened as the HOA's attorney laid out their case. They claimed I was running an illegal commercial operation within their community district, that I had violated multiple code regulations, and that I owed significant fines. Jim stood up for our turn. Your Honor, Mr. Irving has operated his campground legally for 8 years. The Pine Ridge HOA expanded their district boundaries to include his property without proper notice, and is now attempting to retroactively enforce rules that should not apply. Furthermore, Mr. Irving has secured proper permits to access his property through state forest land, meaning his customers never enter HOA territory. The HOA has no standing to regulate his business. Judge Hanson looked down at the paperwork in front of her. Counselor, I have reviewed the rezoning documents from last spring. Notice was sent to all affected property owners. Mr. Irving's claim that he didn't receive proper notice is not supported by the record. My heart sank, but Jim was ready. Your Honor, Mr. Irving was out of state during the comment period, and the notice was not forwarded. More importantly, even if the rezoning was technically proper, applying HOA rules to a pre-existing business violates Minnesota statutes on grandfathered operations. Mr. Irving's campground has been operating continuously since 2018, years before Pine Ridge expanded their district. The HOA's attorney jumped in. Your Honor, the community standards apply to all properties within the district, regardless of when operations began. Mr. Irving's campground negatively impacts property values and quality of life for Pine Ridge residents. How? Judge Hanson asked sharply. Mr. Irving's campground is accessed via state forest land. His customers don't drive through your development. What specific impact are we talking about? The attorney fumbled for a moment. The presence of a commercial operation near our community is itself the impact, Your Honor. Property values are affected by proximity to commercial activity. So you want to shut down his business because it exists, Judge Hanson said flatly. even though it predates your community and operates independently of your infrastructure. We are simply enforcing our duly adopted community standards, the attorney said stiffly. Judge Hanson leaned back in her chair. I've been doing this job for 22 years, and I've seen a lot of HOA disputes. Most of them are petty territorial fights dressed up in legal language. This appears to be one of those cases. Brenda stood up abruptly. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is about maintaining standards. We have worked hard to build a quality community, and Mr. Irving's campground undermines that. Miss Patterson, sit down, Judge Hanson said. You are not addressing the court. Brenda sat, her face flushed. The judge reviewed more documents, then looked up. Here's my ruling. The HOA has authority within its community district boundaries, as established by the county rezoning. However, Minnesota law clearly provides for grandfathering of pre-existing businesses. Mr. Irving's campground predates the district expansion, and is therefore exempt from retroactive application of HOA rules. Furthermore, since Mr. Irving now accesses his property via state forest land under proper permit, the HOA has no grounds to regulate traffic or customer access. The requested injunction is denied. The demand for fines is dismissed. I felt a rush of relief so powerful I almost missed what came next. However, Judge Hanson continued, I am troubled by the pattern of harassment alleged in Mr. Irving's countersuit. Miss Patterson, did you personally issue citations to Mr. Irving for various code violations? Brenda stood again, more cautiously this time. Yes, Your Honor. As HOA president, it is my duty to enforce community standards. And did you have proper authority to issue those citations given that Mr. Irving's property was not subject to your rules at the time? A long pause. I believed we had authority, Your Honor. Believing you have authority and actually having it are two different things, Judge Hanson said. Mr. Irving, have you paid any of these fines? No, Your Honor, I said. My attorney advised me not to. Good advice. Miss Patterson, the HOA will refund any fines collected from other property owners in similar situations. Additionally, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Irving's legal fees in the amount of. She looked at Jim, who supplied a number, $7,300. Perhaps that will encourage more careful consideration before launching legal action in the future. The HOA attorney was on his feet. Your Honor, we respectfully object. The HOA acted in good faith. Good faith doesn't mean immunity from consequences when you're wrong, Judge Hanson said. This matter is settled. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down and I sat there stunned. I had won. Not just survived, but actually won outside the courthouse. Jim shook my hand with a huge grin. That went better than I expected. Judge Hanson doesn't like HOAs abusing their power. You got lucky with the assignment. Lucky or not, I'll take it, I said. Thank you, Jim. Seriously. Thank me by sending some campers my way, he said with a laugh. I could use a weekend at that campground of yours. Brenda and her board members left without saying a word, but the look she gave me could have curdled milk. Over the next few weeks, things settled into a new normal. My campground stayed busy through the end of summer. The new trail became something of a novelty, a winding drive through beautiful forest that added to the sense of adventure. Some campers actually preferred it to the old entrance. The permanent permit from the forestry department arrived in September, along with a bill for the annual fee and a detailed maintenance schedule. I paid it gladly and got to work installing the water bars and markers Paula had required. Pine Ridge HOA paid my legal fees as ordered, though the check came with a terse letter from their attorney. I deposited it and used part of the money to build a proper parking area at the trail entrance on the logging road, with a big sign that said, "Irving's Lakeside Campground, welcome." I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. In early October, after most of the fall color tourists had gone home and the campground was quiet, I got a visit from a state environmental inspector. His name was Mark Chen, and he showed up with a clipboard and a serious expression. "Mr. Irving, I need to inspect your trail and campground," he said. "We received a complaint about environmental damage and unpermitted development on state forest land." My stomach dropped. "I have permits. Paula Hendricks approved everything." "I know," Mark said. "I have her file right here." "But complaints have to be investigated. Someone filed a very detailed report claiming you've caused erosion, damaged wildlife habitat, and exceeded the scope of your permits. Mind if I take a look?" "Be my guest," I said, though I had a sinking feeling I knew who had filed that complaint. Mark spent 3 hours walking every inch of my trail and campground. He checked the water bars, examined trees, looked for signs of erosion or contamination, and took probably 100 photos. I followed along, answering questions and trying not to look nervous. Finally, we ended up back at my cabin. Mark flipped through his notes, then looked up at me. "Mr. Irving, whoever filed this complaint was either lying or doesn't know what environmental damage looks like. Your trail is in good shape. The water bars are working. I don't see any significant erosion or habitat damage. You're well within the scope of your permit." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "So I'm clear." "You're clear," Mark said. "I'll file a report saying the complaint was unfounded. That should be the end of it." He paused. "For what it's worth, I deal with a lot of people who develop land, and most of them do the bare minimum. You actually seem to care about doing it right. I appreciate that." "Thanks," I said. "This land is special to me. I want to protect it." After Mark left, I sat down and sent an email to Jim Kowalski detailing the inspection and asking if there was any way to stop Brenda from continuing to harass me with false complaints. Jim's response was blunt. "Not really. Filing complaints is protected activity as long as they're not criminally false. Best advice is to document everything and hope she gets tired of losing." But Brenda didn't get tired. Over the winter, I received 3 more inspections based on complaints she filed. One from the county health department about my outhouse facilities. One from the fire marshal about my fire rings. One from a building inspector about my cabin allegedly violating setback requirements. Every single inspection came back clean. Every single complaint was unfounded. And every single time, I had to take a day off work to deal with inspectors and paperwork. By the time spring rolled around and camping season started again, I was exhausted and frustrated. Brenda had found a way to make my life hell without technically doing anything illegal. She couldn't shut down my campground, so she was trying to drown me in bureaucratic hassle. Then, something unexpected happened. One of my regular campers, a woman named Francine Gregory, who was a lawyer down in Minneapolis, asked me about all the inspection notices she had seen posted at the campground entrance. "I have been coming here for 3 years," Francine said, "and I've never seen so many inspections." "What's going on?" I explained the whole situation. The HOA dispute, the court case, Brenda's ongoing harassment campaign. Francine listened carefully, then said, "Yates, what she's doing is called vexatious litigation, filing repetitive, unfounded complaints to harass someone. It's not technically illegal, but it can be stopped if you can prove a pattern." "How do I prove a pattern?" I asked. "Document everything. Every complaint, every inspection, every result. Then file for a restraining order preventing her from filing further complaints without showing probable cause. It's a high bar to clear, but if you have enough evidence of bad faith, a judge might grant it." I thought about this. Would you be willing to help me with that? Francine smiled. I don't practice in Minnesota, but I can consult with your attorney. Send me everything you have. Over the next month, Francine worked with Jim to build a case. We documented 8 separate complaints filed by Brenda or other Pine Ridge HOA board members, all of which had resulted in clean inspections. We gathered statements from the inspectors, several of whom expressed frustration with being sent on wild goose chases. We compiled evidence of Brenda's personal animus toward me, including screenshots of posts she had made in Pine Ridge HOA online forums, calling me a nuisance and encouraging residents to file complaints. In June, we filed a motion for a harassment restraining order. The hearing was set for mid-July. This time, the courtroom was even more packed. Apparently, word had spread in the local community about the ongoing dispute, and people were interested. Several of my regular campers showed up to support me, including Tom and his family from Wisconsin and Francine. The judge this time was a younger man named Patrick Sullivan. He reviewed our motion and the evidence, then looked at Brenda, who sat alone. The rest of the HOA board had apparently decided not to show up. Miss Patterson, have you filed 8 separate complaints against Mr. Irving in the past 10 months? Judge Sullivan asked. I filed legitimate concerns about violations, Brenda said. As a citizen, that's my right. It's your right to file complaints that have a basis in fact, Judge Sullivan said. According to the inspection reports, every single one of your complaints was unfounded. Every single one. At what point does this stop being legitimate concern and start being harassment? I have a responsibility to protect my community, Brenda said, her voice rising. Mr. Irving's campground is a blight. Just because inspectors didn't find violations doesn't mean there aren't problems. Actually, that's exactly what it means, Judge Sullivan said. You don't get to invent problems that don't exist. Mr. Irving has provided substantial evidence that you are filing complaints in bad faith for the purpose of harassment. That's not protected activity. Jim stood up. Your Honor, we're asking for a restraining order that prevents Miss Patterson or any other Pine Ridge HOA board member from filing complaints against Mr. Irving without first obtaining approval from the court. We believe this is necessary to stop an ongoing pattern of abuse. The judge considered this. Miss Patterson, do you have any evidence that Mr. Irving is actually violating laws or regulations? He shouldn't be operating a campground in a residential area, Brenda said stubbornly. That argument was already rejected by Judge Hanson last year, Judge Sullivan said. And it's not a violation of law. Give me something specific. Brenda couldn't. She sat there, her face red, unable to produce a single piece of evidence. Judge Sullivan made his ruling. I am granting a limited restraining order. Miss Patterson, you and any other member of the Pine Ridge HOA board are prohibited from filing complaints about Mr. Irving's property or business unless you can show probable cause to believe a violation exists. Any complaints must be pre-approved by this court. Violation of this order can result in contempt charges. Do you understand? This is outrageous, Brenda said. You're taking away my rights. No, I'm protecting Mr. Irving's rights from your abuse of the complaint system, Judge Sullivan said. Court is adjourned. As we left the courthouse, Francine gave me a high five. That was perfect. She can't bother you anymore. Thanks to you, I said. I owe you a season of free camping. I'll take you up on that, Francine said with a laugh. The rest of that summer was the most peaceful I'd had in 2 years. The campground was busy, the weather was beautiful, and for the first time since Brenda showed up at my property that morning, I felt like I could breathe. Then, in early September, something happened that changed everything. I was working on repairing one of the picnic tables when I heard vehicles on the trail. Multiple vehicles, moving fast. I looked up to see 3 SUVs racing into the campground, sliding to stops in clouds of dust. Doors flew open, and men in suits jumped out. For a split second, I thought it was some kind of HOA raid, but then I saw the badges. FBI, Yates Irving, the lead agent asked, holding up identification. "That's me," I said, my mind racing. "What's going on?" "We need to ask you some questions about Pine Ridge HOA and specifically about Brenda Patterson. Is there somewhere we can talk?" We went to my cabin. 6 FBI agents crowded into my small living room, and the lead agent, whose name was Sarah Ortiz, laid out something I never saw coming. "Mr. Irving, we've been investigating Pine Ridge HOA for the past 8 months. We have reason to believe the board has been involved in embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. Your dispute with Miss Patterson came to our attention during the investigation." I stared at her. "Embezzlement? I thought they were just a neighborhood HOA." "So did most people," Agent Ortiz said. "But we've traced over $2 million in suspicious transactions. The HOA collected fees and special assessments from residents for community improvements that were never made. The money was funneled through shell companies, some of which we believe are connected to organized crime." My head was spinning. "And you think I'm involved?" "No," Agent Ortiz said quickly. "We think you're a victim, but we need your help. We need documentation of every interaction you've had with Miss Patterson and the board. Every citation, every fine, every legal filing. It will help establish a pattern of abuse of authority that goes to motive." I spent the next 3 hours going through everything with the agents. I showed them the files Jim and I had compiled for the court cases. I explained the entire timeline of the dispute. They took copies of everything. "This is extremely helpful," Agent Ortiz said as they were leaving. "You may be asked to testify when this goes to trial. Are you willing?" "Absolutely," I said. "If they've been stealing from people, they need to face consequences." The FBI arrested Brenda Patterson and 3 other Pine Ridge HOA board members 2 weeks later. The news coverage was extensive. Apparently, the HOA had been collecting special assessments of $5,000 per household for things like road repairs, beach access improvements, and security systems that were never actually done. Over 300 households had paid these assessments over a period of 4 years. The money had disappeared into a network of shell companies controlled by Brenda and her associates. Some of the money was found in offshore accounts. Some of it had been used to buy property in other states. And some of it, according to the FBI, had been laundered through businesses connected to a Chicago crime family. The trial was set for the following spring. In the meantime, Pine Ridge HOA was put into receivership. The remaining board members, who had apparently been kept in the dark about the fraud, resigned. The residents filed a class action lawsuit to recover their money. I was called to testify in March. The courthouse was packed with residents of Pine Ridge, many of whom I recognized from the original hearing where Brenda had tried to shut down my campground. Their expressions ranged from angry to devastated. On the witness stand, I explained how Brenda had targeted my property, filed false complaints, and tried to use HOA authority to destroy my business. The prosecutor used my testimony to show a pattern of Brenda abusing her position for personal vendettas and power trips. "Mr. Irving," the prosecutor asked, "in your opinion, did Miss Patterson seem to view herself as above the rules?" "Objection calls for speculation," Brenda's defense attorney said. "I'll rephrase," the prosecutor said. "Did Miss Patterson ever say or do anything that suggested she believed normal rules didn't apply to her?" I thought about all the interactions, all the times Brenda had dismissed legitimate concerns or ignored contrary evidence. "Yes," I said, "multiple times." When I showed her that my campground was operating legally, she said it didn't matter. When inspectors found no violations, she continued filing complaints anyway. She seemed to believe that, as HOA president, whatever she decided was right was automatically correct, regardless of facts or law. The jury convicted Brenda Patterson and the other board members on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Brenda got 8 years in federal prison. The others got between 4 and 6 years each. The residents of Pine Ridge recovered about 60% of the stolen money through asset seizures. It wasn't everything, but it was something. As for me, life returned to normal. The new Pine Ridge HOA board, elected by fed-up residents who wanted nothing to do with the old regime, sent me a formal letter apologizing for the harassment and confirming that my property was not subject to any HOA rules. They even offered to pay additional compensation for my trouble, but I declined. The court ordered legal fees had been enough. My campground thrived. The story of the dispute and the resulting FBI investigation attracted attention, and I actually had to expand to 8 sites to meet demand. People liked the idea of supporting a small business that had stood up to a corrupt HOA and won. The trail through the state forest became something of a local legend. Hikers and mountain bikers started using it with my permission, and I worked with the forestry department to create a separate pedestrian path that branched off from my access road. It became part of the Superior Hiking Trail Network. Tom and his family still come every summer. Francine visits twice a year and brings friends. I even get international tourists now, people who read about the campground online and want to experience a piece of authentic Minnesota wilderness. On quiet evenings, I sit by the lake and watch the sunset, thinking about how close I came to losing all of this. The waves still lap against the rocks with that same ancient rhythm. The loons still call across the water. The pines still tower overhead, unchanged by all the human drama that played out in their shadows. Brenda Patterson tried to steal my Lakeside Campground using bureaucratic tricks and the weight of an HOA she controlled. She thought she could bully me into submission, that I would fold rather than fight. She was wrong. When she tried to block my access, I rolled in with a dozer and cleared a new trail around her. And when she kept coming, I stood my ground until the truth came out. Sometimes I wonder if Brenda ever thinks about that morning when she first showed up at my property with her manila folder and her ultimatums. If she ever reflects on how a simple dispute over a small campground led to an FBI investigation that unraveled her entire criminal enterprise. Probably not. People like Brenda don't tend toward introspection, but I think about it sometimes. About how standing up for what's right, even when it's hard and expensive and uncertain, can lead to unexpected consequences. About how corruption eventually eats itself from the inside. About how a bulldozer and a stubborn streak can sometimes be exactly what you need. The campground is open from May through October every year. 6 sites, $20 a night, no reservations needed. Just follow the trail through the forest, the one that winds past towering pines and moss-covered rocks, the one that a lot of people call the Freedom Trail now. It will bring you to a beautiful stretch of Lake Superior shoreline where you can sit by a fire under the stars and remember what really matters. And if you see a middle-aged guy with calloused hands and a quiet smile, that's probably me. Come say hello. I'll tell you the whole story over a beer, and you won't believe half of it. But every word is true. Because sometimes the best stories are the ones where a regular person stands up to corruption, refuses to back down, and wins not just for themselves but for an entire community. Sometimes the best stories are about lakeside campgrounds and HOA presidents who thought they owned the world but ended up in federal prison instead. Sometimes the best stories are about bulldozers and new trails and the simple truth that nobody, no matter how powerful they think they are, gets to steal what's yours. This is one of those stories, and I lived every single day of it.